Welcome to Pair This With That, the podcast for everyday wine enthusiasts and amateur foodies who want to broaden their knowledge in a casual, conversational forum. In just about 30 minutes each episode, we'll help you become that friend people go to when they want to know what wine to have with dinner or how to pick out the right bottle at the local wine shop. You don't have to be a sommelier or a chef. You just need a healthy curiosity. Join us as we expand our food and wine knowledge together. And now, here's your host, John Reed.
All right, welcome back to Pair This With That. I'm your host, John, and I apologize for the absence for a few months. I had a few personal issues that I had to deal with, nothing serious, but I am super thrilled to be back with you and with my very special guest who is joining me from rainy London, and his name is Philip Stephenson-Oliver, and he runs... I got to know Philip just indirectly because of his Instagram account, which is called The Wine Man. And if you're not following him, I highly recommend it. He's got some great videos on there that I think are really valuable to those people who are getting into wine for the first time. He does a lot of short videos, but informative videos on wine topics that I think all wine enthusiasts would be interested in. So, Philip, please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you and what you do.
Well, my full name is Philip Stephenson-Oliver, and I've been in the wine trade for about 12 years now. I first I tended my first harvest when I was 18 years old. I'm obviously from Britain, from England, and for those who know the UK well, I'm from Sussex. Sussex is in the south of England. It's by the English Channel, and that's where some of the best English vineyards are currently located at the moment. So I kind of grew up around some of the best vineyards this country has to offer, and we do make some actually surprisingly brilliant sparkling wine in the south of England. That I would argue, piles of champagne. And so I grew up around that. So I then went on from sort of as a little sommelier from a small little restaurant in Lewis, and then went up the sort of the wine chain, the wine world, as it were. And after working for a few big companies, I kind of thought, okay, I'm going to sort of go it alone, and I'm adamant I invented virtual wine tastings before they became a thing. I was doing them in 2019. I'm adamant. It just happened that COVID thing came along, and then everyone went crazy for them. So I've kind of ridden that wave, and I'm now on the very much in-person tasting front. And now I'm obviously doing lots of stuff with Instagram and trying to do my best to educate people about quite easy bits about wine, which they sometimes won't have access to.
So you're making some pretty bold claims. First, your sparkling wine in England is on par with champagne, and now you invented the wine tasting. So
I'm a man of bold
pretty
claims.
Bold.
Well, I mean, I can pretty much have evidence of both of those. I did a very big wine tasting in the very beginning of 2019, and virtual wine tastings were not a thing. I mean, they were not a thing. Just because I was working with a big company at the time, and they were perplexed how to get everyone into the sort of same venue. They had their colleagues all over the world, and so I got wine sent out everywhere. I somehow managed to get wine into, let's just say, countries that don't really allow wine. And we had a fantastic wine tasting, and IRE, the English sparkling wine, I'll give you two things on this. They've done some blind tastings quite recently, and some of the best English sparkling wine did triumph over some of the best champagnes. Because actually, if you think about the southeast of England, we share the same chalk soil, chalk pan as Champagne. And if you think about longitude and latitude, we're almost identical in terms of our climate. So, we don't have the history, but we've got all the other stuff going for us. And, the plucky Brit will always come through eventually.
Yeah, I believe there are a lot of The streets. I think before the Little Ice Age hit, England did really have a big viticulture industry, if I'm not
Yeah,
mistaken.
yeah.
And
I
then
mean, the
the
Romans had to
Little
do
Ice Age
something.
hit, and yeah, and the streets, a lot of the streets are named after kind of like wine oriented as far as their names go. So it makes sense as to why England would have such a good tradition of wine.
Well, there's also a
Now,
rumor. I
yep.
don't know how true this rumor is that we actually kind of invented the sparkling aspect of sparkling wine, but no one can prove any of this because it's all shrouded in history and all this sort of stuff.
And the French will just shout you down anyway and say that they invented
You
it.
know,
Yeah.
wouldn't stand a chance.
So tell me a little bit about growing up. So first, would you kind of alluded to the UK being conducive to a culture for cultivating an interest in wine, but to the average American, it seems more like a pub and pint culture. So was was wine a big part of your family life growing up?
Well, Britain is a conducive atmosphere to drinking, full stop. So, we have a rather proud drinking culture. I suppose I always had sort of at dinner tables and family dinners and all this lot. Even when I was young, would have a little thimble of wine. So I was always around it, and it was never something to be sort of guarded against. But I suppose, like I said, the sort of mix with me being where I was in Sussex, surrounded by all these vineyards. My father and my grandpa were uh, very keen wine drinkers. I think that's just because it looked more sophisticated when they got drunk, but they did very much, and they still do, very much like their wine. And so, yeah, I mean, it was an atmosphere which encouraged exploration and trying new things. I had a relatively sort of liberal upbringing in terms of trying new things, and yeah, so I think it was very conducive to sort of getting in the sort of wine wine world, and wine definitely played a big part of my family life. My mother can attest to that because how much she likes her Sauvignon.
Yeah, I think that's why I wanted to originally wanted to get into wine because I was in my mid 20s and I just thought, well, I don't want to drink beer all the time. First of all, it's just liquid bread, and second of all, you look more like an adult if you have a glass of wine versus a pint of beer.
Do you know what? I'm so glad you said that about because I've been calling it liquid bread for years because it is very much like that, and particularly if you come to the UK and you have a thing called ale or bitter. It's a flat beer, and it's like drinking a loaf of bread. I mean, it's fantastic. I love it, but it's yeah, and a Guinness is like drinking a pie. So
Yeah, it's just a little heavy for me. And people, in college, other guys would chug beers, and if I tried that, I couldn't do it. All I could do was like sip beer very quickly, and that was my version of chugging.
I've never been able to
So
chug.
yeah,
I mean, fizzy stuff. It's not conducive to drinking.
no, no, it's not really. So what first sparked your interest in wine? I think in your account you have on your bio you have 10 years of being in the wine industry. So what age were you? What was the situation? I mean, was it kind of growing up when your grandfather was very into wine? What was there one defining moment, or did you just get more and more into it the more you drank it?
I suppose like with everything, it's slowly, and then suddenly. But fundamentally, so like I said, I got involved when I was 18, but then I went to university. I went to university to study history, you know. So when I left and I came back, a history student is often faced with many things, but full-time employment is not one of them. So one of the things the main thing I had going for me was I knew quite a bit about wine for someone of my age. So I then I got a job offered to me by this big company we have in the UK called Laithwaites, and they pay for all your wine education and all these other goodies. And I think it just kind of just sort of kept on taking off, really. That's the best way to describe it. Because wine is one of those things you very much learn, I would say, on the job. I think it's very easy to just, they have textbooks for all these things nowadays and all this lot. But I think until you actually go to a vineyard and you see how how grapes are harvested, how you see how wine is made, you taste lots and lots and lots of different wines. I'm sure you've had this when you've had a tasting with people and you smell a wine and you say, oh, it smells of X, Y, and Z, and they can't pick up on it. It's very much, it's learning as you go. It's experience. It's picking these things up bit by bit. So yeah, I would say it's been gradual, and then, a mild takeoff.
But it sounds like once you got a job into wine, there was no looking back. I mean, that was
no, yeah, that's right.
That was
that's
pretty much your path. Okay, so you didn't really divert from that.
No.
Okay, so now, sorry, go ahead.
No. I'm just saying you're quite right. I mean, as soon as that bug was bitten, it was all games was over.
So now you're doing your own thing. You're doing virtual tastings, and are you also doing live tastings?
Yes. So ever since obviously COVID has stopped, it's mostly, if not 90%, in-person tastings. And because, of course, I'm in London, which is the financial capital of certainly Europe, edging with New York. There's a lot of companies here that want to do sort of large wine tastings for their customers or their clients, and so I do sort of a lot of in-person tastings for banks and large companies and so on and so forth, but also for sort of people that want to, groups of people that want to learn about wine. But also because of we live in a world now where you have people that live everywhere and work for one company. Virtual tastings are still very much a big thing. I did one today, and there were countries on there that were from Australia to Denmark, but based in the UK. So it's a nice way of getting everyone together.
Is it do you basically design the tastings around a theme, like let's say Pinots from around the world, or the wines of South America or something like that? Is it a theme, or is it you just have a feeling that this would be the kind of wines that people would be interested in tasting?
Well, so usually what I do is I think when you have a limited amount of someone's time, you have an hour sometimes, and you really want to explore with them the sort of variety of what wine has, the world of wine has to offer. And I think just to sometimes focus on a particular regional, particular grape style, whatever, it kind of, I think, doesn't do it justice. So I've kind of, over the many years, sort of homed in on sort of a style of wine tasting, which allows people to explore a lot. And it's all about starting in terms of acidity and body. The idea of starting with something that's usually quite acidic, so like a sparkling wine, and something that's very dry, and then going all the way down to, you go to your aromatic whites, your full-bodied whites, your roses, your light reds, your medium reds, your unaged and your aged reds, your pudding wines, your fortified wines, and it means you can explore so much and also learn some quite basic things that people don't think of, which is, the warmer the climate, the often fuller the body is going to be, the higher alcohol it's going to be, the smoother it's going to be. But if you want a sort of wine that's dry and tart and crisp and lovely, often go for the cooler climates. Essentially winemaking is an agricultural, business. And that sometimes I think we forget that. And there's some quite basic rudimentaries which we sometimes forget, which I'd like to think I bring out with these tastings. But if a customer wants to do a vintage claret tasting, then hey, I'm not going to stop them.
Right. So when they book you, what are they, wine enthusiasts that are looking to broaden their horizons typically, or would you say in the, especially in the case of the banks and the corporations who book you, are they just kind of trying to show their employees or their clients a good time with like on a kind of sophisticated level? I mean, what would you say is the typical customer versus the maybe not so typical customer who's genuinely interested in learning more about wine?
Yeah, I think it's a mix of both. I mean, I think one of the things you'll discover, well, I'm sure we've all been to many wine tastings in our lives, is that they can actually be sometimes dull. And I think with these corporations, what they're looking for is not only someone that can teach their colleagues about wine or their customers about wine, but also they have a good time. And it's about understanding, how you get a group of people to have a good time. I would say that it's mostly people that are looking for a sort of sophisticated good time, which I'm all more happy for. But in those gatherings, you're always going to have people that are obsessed with wine and asking questions, and there's always going to be a mix, and that's the case with all these sort of situations. You have a group out there to have fun, and you've got a group that will just make a beeline for you at the end and devour all information that you have.
Excellent. Yeah. I used to go to this wine store all the time near where I used to live in near Philly, and yeah, the owner used to have all these wine classes all the time, and that was people would just during the classes would just pick her brain because she had so much knowledge, and they were genuinely interested. I mean, people who were attending those classes because they really wanted to learn more about wine without having to go through the WSET exams or courses or anything like that. So, yeah, I totally get where you're coming from. So let's talk about your Instagram account, The Wine Man. I noticed that you've only been doing that for about 3 months now, right?
Yeah, if only 2 months. It's all rather exploded quite quickly. I don't know what I've always my friends, even people who don't like me, have always said to me, "You really, have a way about you which you're good on television or you're good on whatever, some sort of social media sort of form like that." I don't know why personally, and so I thought, okay, now's the time to do it. I'm sort of coming up to Christmas, and the thing is, I think what kicked it off actually was I went to a dinner party. It was with close friends. I will not name them, and I remembered one of them just couldn't pour couldn't pour champagne properly. Now this is not a problem. Everyone has these problems, whatever. But I think when you're in the wine world, you realise that you think everyone thinks a bit like you do, and they don't. And actually, you need to remember. I mean, I remember when I was, young and I knew absolutely nothing. And you have to remember that a lot of people are just looking for a nice glass of wine. They're not looking for anything complicated. If for them, wine is a pleasure, but it's not sort of something to be a book to be opened up on. So there's a lot of things that people don't know about. Some people will think Merlot is a wine region rather than a grape. Why should we expect them to know? And the wine world can be quite conservative in its mannerisms, particularly in Europe because of a cocktail of the language barriers there, but also some internal rivalry and internal snobbery. You'll never have a Frenchman drinking an Italian wine, so on and so forth. I thought there's actually the way social media is now. It's all quite short clips. People like to doom scroll, as they call it, and they like to have but a little bit of nugget information in there. And so, those little clips I do, they're no longer, they're more than 30 seconds, but I would like to think each one teaches something, a little nugget which you'll keep in the back of your head, which you can remember about wine.
Yeah, that's why I was kind of very drawn to your account, is because you were taking these topics, one topic per video, but in those 30 seconds, you really kind of cover everything you need to know about whatever it is, Pinot Noir or Sancerre or the different wine glasses that you can choose from. It's all very concise and digestible, and it's not too in the weeds, and it's not going to overwhelm anybody who goes and views them and wants to genuinely pick up just a little nugget about something about wine they didn't know before. So I think you've got the formula down really well. So kudos to you.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that if you can't describe to someone a topic that you really know about and love about in under quite clearly and simply, then often sometimes you don't know actually a lot about it. Anyone can almost over egg and overcomplicate a subject. I'd say the real skill is actually to simplify it. Simple messages that people understand. That's my view anyway.
Yeah, and I read a marketing book. I think it was called "Make It Stick" or "Made to Stick" or something like that. And he mentions in there something called the curse of knowledge. And to your point, if you are somebody who's like deep into the weeds, if you've been a sommelier for 25 years, you live in that world, and you just think everybody speaks your language. So when you try to approach a layman and explain to him different concepts, you're probably going to use terminology that just goes right over their head. And so I think that people who are very talented in the respect of speaking to somebody who they understand that the person that they're speaking to aren't in their world and need kind of them to be kind of like the translator, the interpreter of the key concepts that they want to learn about. I think that's the important thing, and that's really why I wanted to start this podcast and this blog, is because I wanted to kind of approach wine education the way it was done with me, and it's very casual. Take your time, experiment, drink, and just drink all these. Learn about it as you go. Like if you're interested in a wine, if you're interested in a Merlot, all right, well, what is it about this grape or this varietal that I like so much? Like, where does it come from? How is it made? What are the differences between a Merlot I would drink from California versus one from Bordeaux? So I think to your point, it's really a great way to teach the average person who's just getting into wine or wants to learn a little bit more about wine, not to overwhelm them by getting too in the weeds with concepts that are very digestible for a sommelier or a wine specialist, but the average person isn't going to understand what the heck you're talking about half the
Yeah,
time.
and the key concept is to try, and don't be afraid to say, or when you're, to the fear of unknowing sometimes stops us from doing anything at all, and there's the thing about the wine world is that it's never going to be conquered. You and I are never going to know everything there is about the wine world. So we can get over that. It's always to be explored. There are grapes there that I didn't have a clue existed. And I go to vineyards. I've recently came back from Stuttgart. I discovered that they were making a fantastic... they were making a Cabernet Noir blend. And all these grapes that, superb grapes that they're trying. But also there are regions in this, in the world that haven't been given their proper kudos. Sort of Eastern Europe has actually got some amazing vineyards. And actually a classic situation I always find is Germany. Germany has some of the oldest vineyards in the world, and yet we sort of only really assume we think of them as just Riesling, and there's so much to offer, and it's endless. The United States has just got some amazing stuff going on, and has done since the 60s and the 70s. You're doing well.
Yeah, we're only now that we moved to the Hudson Valley, New York. We're only about, I'd say, 3 hours from the Finger Lakes, which has
Yeah.
been a up and coming wine region for I don't know how many decades. But we were really, honestly, pleasantly shocked at the quality of the wines, the different types that they offered. So, yeah, I mean, it really. And if I was in my wine store, I would go for my Burgundy versus a Pinot Noir or a Cab from the Finger Lakes. But now that I've tried it, now that I've gone out of my comfort zone by visiting that region, it's something that I'm going to take look at the shelf, see the Finger Lakes wines, and honestly, like, well, yeah, maybe I do want that for dinner tonight because
Well,
it's
also,
it's
if you,
again like you said, experimentation, drinking more wine, and getting familiar with things that you might not have heard of before.
well, if you think about it, you talk about the Finger Lakes, and you're saying how you would prefer to buy a Burgundy. These, wineries in Fingers Lakes are they're putting so much effort into their wine and experimenting, and it was the same with a lot of English sparkling vineyards. They've put so much time and effort into all this. Whereas a lot of these, fantastic vineyards in Bordeaux and Burgundy and all this lot, because they have a name they can trade under, Burgundy, Bordeaux, Champagne, I tend to find that some vineyards can rest on their laurels a little bit. They won't fight as much for that, fantastic harvest, for that fantastic vintage as some of these little vineyards that you said in Fingers Lakes, who, if I'm correct, do very good Pinot Meunier and very good Pinot Noir, if I'm correct, because they used to make jam. Sorry, they used to make grow their grapes often for jams and jellies, and now it's going to more of a wine region-esque sort of style, if I'm correct.
Yeah, the analogy I like to use when it comes to regions like Burgundy and Bordeaux and the people, the ones that have the great grand traditions, I like to think, I analogize them as the hot blonde chick who doesn't have to try.
Yes.
Whereas you have the regions like the Finger Lakes who have to try a little harder to show how charming they are and how much they have to offer. But Bordeaux and Burgundy, they're just like, oh my God, that's like Selma Hayek or whatever, Kate Upton or whatever.
And the thing is, a lot of these vineyards in Burgundy, which have their Grand Cru status. I mean, yes, there's been amazing wines come out of there, but I must admit, my experience, the thing about Burgundy's a classic one. A good Burgundy, it's very hard to beat. But finding that good Burgundy, even with ginormous prices of sometimes £50, which is $80 to you guys, or you're getting just quite silly money. I've spent quite a lot of money sometimes on some good Burgundies, and they just don't have it. So it's you kind of. I'm a big believer in value for money with these things, and
I've discovered that I've discovered a few bottles of Volnay that are very reasonably priced, and I would say just as good as anything I've had from Burgundy. It was only like $45, and that's if you want a good Burgundy and you don't have the wallet to back it up all the time, then a Volnay is definitely worth your time and worth your $40 if you have it in your wallet.
But the thing is about America, I mean, you've got by the size of your country every conceivable climate you can think of. You really do. You can have. There are parts of the United States which have, I'm sure, the complete exact style of climate as Burgundy, and potentially similar soils. Well, maybe not similar soils, but and so you've got so much opportunity to grow fantastic wines where you are. I mean, I'm a big fan of Californian wines. I'm very much enthusiast. I wish we could get more sort of Pinot Noirs from Oregon. I had one the other day that was just superb. Obviously, they sees a lot of oak, toasted oak. It has that almost Burgundian style to it. Absolutely delicious. But
yeah, I've never met a Willamette Valley Pinot Noir that I didn't like. Honestly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So, so podcast is Pair This With That, and we're all about learning how to pair a wine with a meal, or vice versa. If you want to start with the meal, and then decide what you're going to drink with it, or if you have a bottle that you've picked out that you really want to open, and then deciding what you're going to cook according to the flavor profiles of that particular wine. So, do you have a personal preference when you approach wine and food pairing? Like, do you start with wine and food, or vice versa? How do you approach that process?
It depends how grand and pompous I want to be, really. I mean, if I have I had a 2006 Chablis Premier Cru on my shelf last week, and I think that sort of warranted sort of a particularly good shellfish dish. But I think that I'm pretty relaxed on what to go with what. I mean, I think some of the things I've actually learnt in my time when it comes to food and wine pairing is, I think and I've not actually done a video on this yet, but I think this is something we should appreciate. There are some friends of wine, so things like salt, umami, which is a savouriness, acidity. These will, matching that with a wine will make it go far. Whereas there's some things sort of like sugar, very sweet foods, and spicy foods, which are quite difficult to pair with. But I'll give you a classic example, actually, which is if you think of Italian food. Italian food is quite acidic, if you think about it. It's lemons, it's tomatoes, it's garlic, it's onions. And I don't think it's any coincidence that a lot of Italian wines, both red and white, are quite high in acidity. They've got that almost that tartness to them sometimes, that Sangiovese tartness, and that works so well when pairing with your tomato-based pizza, your anchovies and olives, all these things. So I would argue sometimes, often not to overcomplicate it, but think local. So there's a very good reason why, for example, beef bourguignon goes well with Pinot Noir, and there's a very good example why Nebbiolo goes fantastically well with pizzas. There's all these fantastic examples. And in Champagne, they have these wonderful cheeses they have with it, and in Loire, there's all these sort of examples. And since I am in the UK, a famous dish, obviously, we're known for around the world is fish and chips. And I can actually tell you, as God is my witness, there is no finer wine pairing, I believe, than a good quality restaurant style fish and chips and a bottle of champagne or English sparkling wine. Marriage made in heaven, because you think about it, you've got the salt of the chips, the oiliness, the fat of the chips. You've got the lemon for the acidity. You've got the savouriness of the batter. That with a dry, aromatic champagne or English sparkling wine. Marriage made in heaven.
To what you were talking about earlier, it's kind of like the old saying, what grows together goes together. And that's probably why, like to your point, Nebbiolo goes great with pizza, because the Italians cultivated their food and their wine simultaneously, and it just makes sense that they would go together like that.
Yeah, it does. And sometimes, we don't think of it like that. We try to constantly overcomplicate things, and often these things aren't as complicated as they need to be. The things that are definitely difficult to pair with are those things, like I said, that are spicy or that are sweet. If you were to have a claret, vintage Bordeaux with a very sweet pudding, it's just going to make both. It's going to ruin the flavours of both. And in the same way that if you're going to have, these things just won't go together. And with spicy food as well, this is also a nightmare to sometimes pair. I think this is one of the things I've definitely found out, is that with spicy food, off-dry Rieslings can be fantastic with that. It's very hard to pair red wine, I find, with spicy food, to do it properly anyway. And that with like puddings, if you're having a sort of a pudding that isn't that sweet, like a chocolate torte, something that's a dark chocolate torte, a sultana or a Tokai would be wonderful with that. But I would say, there's some styles where it can be a little bit of a little bit difficult to pair. But like I said, don't one shouldn't overthink it too much. If it's not paired right, the world's not going to end. But I would say the problem is you can make your food and your wine worse if you don't pair it right. And a little trick I would always say to someone at home, just to understand your palate. Next time you have a sparkling wine, have a slice of lemon, drink your wine, have your lemon, and then drink your wine again. And you'll notice when you have your wine the second time round, the wine is sweeter. It's eminently more drinkable because your palate has tasted something acidic, and that helps you understand how you're making the food taste better and the wine taste better.
Yeah, and I think to that point, I'd like just anecdotally the way I got into wine. When I first started getting into wine, I would look at a wine menu and I would look at the flavors that were associated that they listed with whatever Pinot Grigio or Chardonnay or Pinot Noir. And that's how I first, because I was a very picky eater. I really wasn't into food back then. Oh. Kind of like the way I grew up. But Pinot Grigio was my go-to white wine. I would just drink it all the time. And so one time I was at a bar and I ordered a cheeseburger. And I ordered a Pinot Grigio with that. Now, I was not smart enough. I was not experienced enough to understand why those two didn't work together. And now I shudder at the fact that I did that. I mean, I don't think the bartender cared or knew the difference.
No,
but if I was in if I was in a wine, it was kind of like a little divey bar anyway. But it was. I kind of think of like if I was in a wine bar and did that, they'd probably like go in the back room and laugh at me. But yeah, to your point though, but to that point, I think you have to go through those little, I don't want to call them failures, but experiments as to just drink what you want, eat with what you want to eat with. And if it doesn't work, you're going to find out pretty soon. And the more you learn, the more you understand, the more you taste, the more you're going to understand why certain things go with certain foods.
Yeah, and also some people's palates are different. I mean, in this country we have a big curry culture, and you'll have lots of red wine with curry, and it's not sometimes that big an issue. I tend to probably wouldn't have red wine with spicy food, but with some people it doesn't really matter to them, and all credit to them. I mean, if it's I've always said when it comes to the sort of potentially quite pretentious world of wine, it is actually ultimately about what you like, and your palate is going to be different from mine, and what I like is going to be different from what you like. Same with shoes and cars. And so it's wine should be, I think, both accessible, but also a little bit mysterious, because, like I said, we're never going to know anything all about it. So it's trying to weigh up both those, worlds.
Indeed. So you mentioned earlier before about, one of your favorite pairings is champagne and fish and chips, like restaurant quality fish and chips. Do you have any other really favorite wine pairings? Like if you were to recommend one dish and one wine to go with it to somebody, what would that be?
So I might be unpopular here actually, but I'm a big believer when it comes to steak and sort of good barbecue food. I'm a big believer in lighter reds. I think you don't want to sometimes overpower sort of delicate steak with a really strong red wine. So more of a Pinot Meunier, Pinot Noir, sort of Cabernet Franc-esque. But a sort of indulgent thing I always enjoy is pate or foie gras with a sweet wine. I don't know what it's like in America, but in this country, we have a terrible attitude to sweet wines. We think sweet wines are cheap. We think they are, and it all dates back to, I can tell you all the history of the UK, but it all dates back to essentially, we used to buy a lot of off-dry white wine from Germany, and it wasn't very good, and so we just assumed sweet equals bad. And a sauterne or a Tokai with a pate or foie gras is a match made in heaven. But that's sort of. Also, I'm a big believer in dry rosés. Dry rosés with some meat dishes can be absolutely delicious. Of semi-spicy sausages, things like that.
Yep.
But it's one of those things. It's a rabbit hole which you can go into and never come out of again.
Yeah, and I think going back to the sweet wines, I think the more snobbish wine people kind of associate that with being juvenile. Like if you like sweet, you like sugary stuff, and you might as well drink soda or something like that. But I think, again, I think it depends on the situation.
Yes, I mean, please do show me someone who does think that, who are supposedly wine snobs, because they don't really know their history. I mean, if anyone really wants to know their history, every single monarch in Europe was enthralled by sweet wines. There was, Tokai was the favourite drink of King Louis the 15th, 14th. Sweet wines can be quite sometimes difficult to pair with, but I think that's because we always assume sweet wine should be paired with something sweet. And actually, sweet wines are something savoury. I mean, has anyone heard of sweet and sour? The magic made in heaven, sweet and sour. It's the perfect palate combination. If they think sweet wines are juvenile, they should go to Sauterne, and they'll have a very angry Frenchman slapping them on the face. So,
I will definitely recommend that anybody who says they don't like sweet wine go to Sauterne.
Go to Sauterne and speak to a Frenchman about that. I'll sort you out.
I'm an engine of chaos, and I like causing trouble. So, all right. So we're at the end of the episode. So the most important question I have to ask you is the bow tie. When did you decide that was going to be your signature look?
I don't almost think I almost did decide. I think, like with everything, I fell into it. I've got a whole host of ties and bow ties, and I think I've always. The thing about bow ties, also something very important to understand, is that you need to have the proper ones that you tie yourself. I have a unique, not disdain, but I'm always allergic to these pristine ones that you get off the shelf. So. I think it separates. You see men in ties all the time nowadays, but you rarely see a bow tie, and I think bow ties have a bit of a niche to them, a bit unique.
It's distinctive.
Pardon?
It's distinctive.
Yeah, it's distinctive. Yeah, very much so.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely among your friends, Philip is the bow tie guy.
Yeah, well, there you go. And it's and then it takes a second to take off, and you're all there.
Nice. All right. So I think that is the perfect place to end. If you like this episode, be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel and follow me on Instagram and Twitter. Philip, the Wine Man, is your Instagram account. Are there any other social media channels or websites you want to direct people to? I know you have your business website where you arrange tastings. I mean, I assume that if someone in America would like a virtual tasting, you accommodate them?
Yes, I mean, if you have any particularly well-off city people in New York that want to fly me over on a nice private jet, then I'll be more than happy to come. But the best thing to do is just to go on my Instagram, my website's there, or my business website is wine-ta.co.uk, which is an acronym for Tasting Adventures. But yes, I mean, I'm quite prepared to go both global and international, so no problem.
Well, if I meet any rich friends, I might be too busy trying to get my own flights to wherever than recommending that they fly you over here. So no offense, but...
I'm sure there'll be enough for all of us to go around.
All right. We'll figure out something. All right, yeah. Philip, I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me, and I hope to have you back sometime.
Yes, we'll watch each other's careers with great interest, to quote a Star Wars statement.
Indeed. All right. Thank you very much. And that's it. Thank you for joining us, everybody, and good night.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Pair This with That. Be sure to subscribe to us on YouTube and follow us on Instagram and Facebook. Until next time, cheers.